Welcome to the Enigmatic Dutch defense course brought to you by ChessEnigma. I'm Latvian chess grandmaster Arturs Neiksans, and it is my pleasure to explain you the way you can beat white's d4 and c4 with a very aggressive Dutch defense. So we are going to start this first chapter by playing d4 f5. And one of the most biggest reasons why people are playing the Dutch defense, it is the fact that it gives black rather unorthodox, sometimes even weird systems where normal rules, they simply don't apply. And that's why the Dutch defense is quite a popular weapon, not only at the club level, but also at the highest level. So here our idea is to fight for the center, and you're going to see it's quite similar to the Sicilian defense, only this time it's mirrored to the other side, meaning e4, c5 would be the Sicilian, and here Dutch defense is d4, f5. And then we want to develop our pieces with knight f6, e6, and fight for the center. So c4 makes perfect sense. e6, knight c3, also a very reasonable plan for white at some point. Think about ideas like e4 next. So we play bishop b4 and make sure this never happens. And as a rule of thumb, it's a good idea to bring out the bishop on b4 because the position, the structure you'll be aiming for is to play at some point knight f6, short castle, d6, b6, bishop b7, and maybe even e5 at some point, right? And when you play d6, your dark square bishop standing on either f8 or e7 doesn't really have a lot of space, so that's why it makes sense to position it on b4 and trade it. So here after knight f3, we can safely take on c3 by establishing a better control of the e4 and e5 squares. And b takes, knight f6, e3, and you see that white has created these double pawns on c4 and c3. And they make quite an easy target. So here your bishop on c8 is not doing much, and now it's time to activate it by positioning it on b7, giving you a very nice control of the long diagonal. Now here white has a couple of choices. For example, white decides to start with bishop e2. After bishop e2, bishop b7, all of this is pretty standard. We continue development. And white at some point might want to play a4 to threaten to play a5. It is of course tempting to respond with a5, fix this a4 pawn as a weakness, but you should always watch out for c5 and bishop a3 ideas, and maybe your queenside won't be ready to meet this. So that's why here it's actually a good idea to ignore it by applying some pressure against the pawn on c3. And here after queen c2, we have the nice idea of knight c6. So not only we have an idea to block the a pawn's advancement to a5, but we're also thinking about future ideas like knight a5, bishop a6, which not only blocks the a pawn, but also we are targeting this weak pawn on c4. Now, for example, let's say white would play something like d5. Here, probably it's not a good idea to take, right? Because if we take it and play knight a5, c4, white simply secures his center and most importantly opens the long diagonal for the dark square bishop. You see on b2, it's going to be quite a monster. So we are going to play knight a5 here and we want to capture this pawn. So the basic rule applies. You want to conquer your opponent's weaknesses, not trade them. And after knight a5, I guess something like rook d1 could be played, threatening to take on e6, simple queen f6, again applying pressure against the pawn on c3, here, and bishop e6. Black carries out the typical idea. And here you see white already has some real issues to defend the pawn on c4. So probably something like knight e2 could be played, take it. I mean, if white here takes with the rook, you just grab with the bishop on c4, enjoying an extra pawn. But after queen takes on d2, there is a fork, right? And black simply has extra exchange after the opening. So this is something that probably white doesn't really want to do. I mean, d5 itself in Dutch defense positions, from the white's perspective, it is a very common move because white is freeing d4 square with moves like knight e4, and he could be threatening your knight on e4 with something like f3. But the execution is everything, so this is probably not very good. So after knight c6, white can also try to play bishop a3, attacking your rook on f8, rook f6. And this rook lift is a very, very common maneuver in the Dutch defense positions. Unlike the Dutch Leningrad, where you position your ducks with bishop on g7, here your rook by this lift, rook f6, rook g6, and rook h6 can actually cause quite a lot of damage to white at the king side. Now, for example, white plays knight e2. I mean, he wants to get rid of your knight from the center, either by trading it or playing f3. We can simply take here and now combine two ideas. One, go after this weak pawn on c4 and also threatening with a fork on b3. Let's say white counters it successfully and he plays rook b1. And now rook h6 is a very big threat because now there's a very strong queen h4 threat threatening to win the pawn on h2 and actually deliver a checkmate. Now white has several choices. For example, let's say white decides to play g3, which makes sense because it stops queen h4, but as you can see, it severely weakens the long a8, h1 diagonal. So this following maneuver you should actually remember. Queen h4 is a killer blow out of the blue. Black sacrifices a queen, is threatening to mate on h2, and the point is, after g takes, rook g6, the white king has nowhere to escape because it is a checkmate on the board. So g3 actually would be a grave mistake. White gonna do this. White could also try to play f3, which is a pretty reasonable move because white is closing the bishop on b7 the best he can. So you still play queen h4, h3, rook g6. Now queen takes on h3 is a threat. King h1 is necessary. Queen g1, threatening with a mate on g2. And white is just not in time even to start his own gameplay. Rook g1, rook h6 is a threat. And now rook takes on h3 is already a killing blow. For example, if white misses it, that's a mate on the board. So white can't afford to miss this. So instead of this, white could play something like bishop f1. And now knight takes on c4 could be a surprise coming from the queen side. So here you go. I mean, we are simply winning a pawn with more threats incoming. And after bishop c4, bishop takes on f3. Once again, rook takes on h3 is a huge threat. Check. Queen h4. Black has a killing attack. So a pretty amazing resource from the black's perspective. You're going to see that these plans are very often straightforward as soon as you play rook f6. Finally, white could try to play something like rook b2. There's another idea I would like to show you, or maybe some other move. The point is, after queen h4, h3, you might have access to bishop takes on g2, completely exposing the black king. And this leads to a swift mate on the board. So white can get into trouble very quickly. So we're going to go back all the way to this moment when white played bishop e2. Probably bishop d3 is slightly more ambitious because white is fighting for the e4 square. So here, simple bishop b7, nothing really changes. Castles, castles, a4. Once again, white wants to play a5 and provoke you to play a5 yourself, so that after c5, bishop a3, white has pretty serious counterplay at the queen side. So we still play knight e4, attacking the pawn on c3, and now white has some choices. So the main move here is queen c2, but let's check some other options. For example, let's say white decides to sacrifice this pawn. After knight takes on c3, queen c2. Probably the most important thing is we not only won a pawn, but we are about to take on f3, because you see the queen on d1 cannot protect the knight on f3 no longer, so there's a very nice shot, bishop f3, I mean, here, if white takes on c3, this is probably just bad news, right? Queen g5, queen h5, queen h3 is a main threat, rook f6, rook h6 is a very big threat, so probably this is something that white doesn't even want to do, right? Just play rook f6 and the mate should be very, very close. So most likely after bishop takes on f3, white has to take it. Now we give a check. And we play queen h5. And as it happens, actually this pawn on f3 is very difficult to defend, right? Because rook f6, rook g6 is incoming. If white is thinking about king g2 ideas. Bishop e2, we just gladly take it and enjoy an extra pawn. So, white has no choice. White takes on c3, we give a check here, here, and having already a draw in the pocket with queen g4 and queen f3 perpetual check, black continues to play for the win. Rook g6 is a killing threat, white has to respond with rook e1, and now we are not allowing the king to escape to f1, queen h3. And this leads to a mate on the board. Once again, pretty tough things for white. And a5 otherwise would be a very interesting idea. It just doesn't lead to the desired result because this knight c3, bishop f3, queen g5, queen h5, and rook f6 idea is simply too strong. All right, what else can white can do? Probably something like knight d2, which is a very interesting idea from some Nimzo positions. White is offering you to take on c3. So if you would take on c3, after queen c2, the knight on c3 has nowhere really to go. You go back. Now this position simply is slightly better for white. I mean, he enjoys a strong center and he has the bishop. And on top of that, I think it's pretty important to understand that we lose any kind of dynamics. And the main reason why we're playing the Dutch defense, it is the dynamics. And that's why here after knight e2, queen h4 is necessary. We are defending the pawn on e4. I mean, not the pawn, but the knight on e4, which is protected by the pawn. For example, white here plays queen c2. After queen c2, we can carry out already a known idea. Take on d2, expose the king, give a check, and you already know the maneuver rook f6. So rook g6 once again is a killing threat. Rook goes away, and queen h3, we don't allow the white king to escape to f1. Rook h6 this time instead of rook g6. And in the end, there is still a mate on the board. As you can see here after rook h6, there simply was no defense because all of white's pieces are disconnected and they're doing something else at the queen side. So we're going to go back here. Okay, instead of queen c2, maybe white can try to play something else, perhaps something like g3. But after g3, knight g5 is a very, very cool shot, meaning a g takes on h4 is knight h3 checkmate. You see the bishop on b7 takes away a lot of important squares on g2 and h1 for the white king to escape. So let me show it to you, right? That's a mate on the board. The king cannot escape anywhere. And if instead of this, white plays f3, queen h3, we have a very strong attack. Think about moves like d6, e5, knight e7, knight f6, maybe at some point even rook f6, rook h6. And if somebody is enjoying this position, it's definitely black. So all of this is maybe not so great. Right. So where did I left here? Yeah, here. Instead of knight e2, there's also a bishop takes on e4 move, which feels quite a concession, because if we go back here, I do believe that in this position, white's pride is the two bishop power, and giving up just like that, here after bishop takes on e4, white pretty much says, listen, I have two weaknesses and I have nothing to show for it. So this should be already pretty great feeling to you. We are going to take with a pawn so that we can accelerate the kingside attack. Again, think about ideas rook f6, so rook goes to the h6. g3, here, a5, rook f6, and again, we are carrying out this idea, and rook h6 is becoming a really big threat. But here's an important detail. Let's say white plays rook e1, and his idea is to bring the rook to e1 so that it frees the f1 square for the knight. You see, the knight at f1 would protect the h2 pawn. Now there's a very cool shot here. Rook takes on f2 because the white rook on f1 no longer is guarding the f2 square. And after king takes, check, here, all we need to do is get reinforcements for the attack. After knight c6, you see rook f8 already is killing, as bishop a3 doesn't stop anything because after d6, rook f8 is deciding the game in favor for black. I think all of this is pretty cool and straightforward. So we are going to go back here, and white might play something like queen c2 here as well. I mean, he should be doing something about this knight on e4. We are going to play knight c6, since a5 is still a threat. And again, white has some choices. So bishop takes on e4 is definitely a move we are going to check in a moment, but let's once again return to the move d5. As already explained, d5 is a very common idea in the Dutch defense from the white's perspective. So white needs to understand when to carry it out. And nothing really changes from your perspective. You don't want to take on d5 because white will continue with c4 and bishop b2, enabling him a very powerful dark square bishop on the long diagonal. And that's why here we are going to play knight a5, which offers a pawn sacrifice, at least temporarily. For example, bishop e4 takes and queen e4. It seems that white is doing great. He has an extra pawn, but look at his weaknesses here. And look at his terrible dark square bishop on c1. So you're going to play here queen e8, which already comes with direct threats to win back the pawn on d5, as the queen on e4 will be under attack. So queen d3. And now we rearrange the knight to a more active square on c5, queen d4, and on top of the great position you have here, there might be a killer blow. Rook f3, queen g6, and white loses material. Of course, I mean, rook b1 maybe is not really necessary. White could have played something else, and if white plays something else, these pawns on d5, c4, a4 make a fine target. It's just a sample line. Yeah, so bishop e4 I already showed to you. There also might be bishop a3. And bishop a3, again, is a very common maneuver for these types of positions. We are quite happy to position our rook on f6 because you're already quite familiar with this maneuver. After rook h6, we're thinking about trying to get to the kingside attack. Well, I guess white has to take the pawn. He takes it. We just play the same maneuver once again. Queen e8, and we're threatening to take on d5, and the queen on e4 will be under attack. White defends the pawn. We play queen h5. There are already some threats incoming. h3, rook e8. Once again, we are threatening to take on d5. We're threatening to play bishop a6. So after a couple of moves, let's say, whatever white does, after d takes on e5, the queen is hanging, and if the queen goes away, rook f3 already might be a killer blow. Let's go back. Definitely d5 here is not the only move. Again, d5 is a very responsible decision, so white could also play knight d2, which is one of the common maneuvers white wants to play at some point, f3 and e4. And if he does this and positions his bishops on e3 and d3, he has a very good nimzo position. And that's why we need to apply the pressure against the pawn on c4 as quickly as we can. So that's why a simple takes, and knight a5. So white is carrying out his idea, but he's simply too slow. Because after bishop a6, he can take the center, but it's going to cost him a pawn. And also, we're going to trade a bishop pair in the process. But queen a2 doesn't hold the pawn due to the very simple pin on this diagonal. Black wins a pawn and lands the knight on the great outpost of c4. So finally, what white should do, right? It just makes sense to accept a pawn sacrifice. After bishop e4, take it, queen takes on e4. Once again, white is seemingly up a pawn, but we are having a great compensation here. So knight a5. We are opening the light square bishop. We are attacking the pawn on c4. And most importantly, we're thinking about the kingside attack. If the queen goes away, there's going to be a rook sacrifice on f3. If white plays d5 and tries to close this diagonal, you already know the maneuver. Queen e8. Once again, black is threatening to take on d5. Rook d1, white protects the pawn. Queen h5, same maneuver. And here, white again has a couple of choices. Let's say h3, you play rook e8. So once again, e takes on d5 is a big threat. Knight b3 is a big threat, so white can't really do this. What else? Okay, maybe queen d4 right away. There's a knight b3. Finally, perhaps queen d3, going away from the pin, but this jumps under this very cute exchange sacrifice. Rook f3, rook f8, so you have multiple threats. The pawn on f3 is under attack. Black is threatening knight b3, knight c5, and pretty much all of black's pieces are attacking the white king. So it's pretty difficult for white to understand where to go. And let's say in the end, white does play queen d3, thinking that you're going to take with the bishop here, and after rook f3, things calm down. Well, not quite. We can sacrifice rook on f3, which leads to a very beautiful checkmate. Queen g5, bishop takes on f3, and checkmate on the board. Well, that's it for the first chapter. So once again, let's briefly summarize what we learned. After d4 f5, the main reason why we are going to play the Dutch defense is that we are playing sort of reverse Sicilian to the king side. So e4, c5, here we're playing exactly the same way, but on the other side of the board. Our idea is to play knight f6, e6, and fight for the center. c4 is one of the common ways how white normally plays out this position. And since we are aiming for a position where the knight goes to f6, b6, bishop b7 at some point, we are going to play d6. It's a good idea to remove this bishop from f8, which for the structure doesn't really do much. That's why bishop b4, we take it, and you see your ideas are very often the same. You want to play knight e4, you want to play queen e8, queen h5, rook f6, try to checkmate on the board and meet white's a4 idea, which comes with the a5 threat by playing knight c6, knight a5, and attack the pawn on c4. Sometimes, if necessary, black is ready to sacrifice the pawn on e4 after the black knight lands on e4 to get incredible dynamics.
Access ChessEnigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.